Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Ukraine War News Updates, second part thereof for the 25th of June 2024. We're going to start the military aid and equipment video with Ukraine and the European Union concluding a loan agreement to the amount of 27 billion euros within the Ukraine facility. The document was signed by Minister of Finance of Ukraine, Marchenko, and Chairman of the National Bank, Pishny. Quote, the funds received under this agreement will provide predictable and flexible support to our state, adapted to the unprecedented challenges caused by the war with Russia, the bank's press service noted. So I wonder whether that loan will have any kind of underwriting of it from frozen Russian assets. I don't know, but obviously 27 billion euros is a lot of money. They need that with an annual deficit that they're posting. I don't know whether that's all in one or straight away or small amounts over time. Who knows? But that's all going to help Ukraine. The US is expected to announce more military aid for Ukraine valued at $150 million today. And there is thought that that is going to include HIMARS, possibly ATACMS, 155mm and 105mm shells, anti-armor weapons and small arms. So all the usual stuff that you need to keep prosecuting this war. It's not your big ticket things that might excite some in the news, like a bunch of Abrams tanks or whatnot. HIMARS missiles and artillery ammunition is exactly what Ukraine needs to continue where it's at the moment. Spain has handed over a second batch of Patriot anti-aircraft missiles to Ukraine. Did that on Friday. EFE reports the aid also included Leopard tanks, various types of ammunition, anti-drone systems, optical electronic surveillance and tracking systems. I think Spain, being the fourth biggest economy in Europe, is lagging behind in terms of what it's doing to support Ukraine, but also what it's doing to support its own defence, with one of the lowest of the NATO members in terms of paying spending on defence. French Aid to Ukraine reports that according to the Ministry of Armed Forces in France, 600 AASM Hammer bombs will be produced in 2024 for the purpose of delivery to Ukraine. Now, we'd heard previously that Ukraine was going to get 50 AASM Hammer bombs per month to the tune of 600 previously. I'm a little bit confused. I think this might be a further year's worth, a further 600 of these. Beyond this delivery, the Ministry of Armed Forces now aims to produce 1,200 by 2025, i.e. to double the production. It's not specified whether 1,200 bombs will be delivered to Ukraine in 2025 or whether some of them will be to replenish French Air Force stocks. It's then interesting to note that the French army states that, quote, the same logic applies to orders for Scalp missiles. MBDA, France will supply 40 Scalp. So if we follow the same logic, MBDA, France should be delivering twice as many in 2025, i.e. 80 Scalp EG missiles. But none of that's been confirmed. Obviously, the British are supplying Storm Shadows and the Italians as well. Been several claims that the Italians are supplying Storm Shadows, but I think it's Scalp EGs, but they're pretty much the same missile. Anyway, so don't know the details as to how many they have provided and how many more they're going to be providing and whether this is extending it. So I need a bit of clarification there. But staying on France, with Jordan Bardella, the upstart leader to be, potentially Prime Minister to be, if the Rassemblement National, French National Rally, do as well as they are touted to do in the upcoming parliamentary elections, you might see this far-right leader become Prime Minister. Not Marine Le Pen, who's the overall leader of RN, of Rassemblement National. She is aiming to be president, but the Prime Minister there will be a really bad appointment, or not appointment, really bad eventuality with regard to continued support for Ukraine from France. France have been actually quite pivotal in their support because they are such a major driving force of the EU. And if Bardella comes along, he's already said, yep, we'll keep supporting Ukraine, but only with defensive weapons and He said that, so here, France's, according to Reuters, France's far-right leader, Bardella, sought to reassure European allies over commitment to Ukraine and readiness to stand up to Russia if he became PM. While I'm in, quotes, while I'm in favour of continuing to support Ukraine, so it's like, yeah, we'll support Ukraine, really kind of vague, positive rhetoric towards Ukraine. Any red line remains, my red line, sorry, remains long-range missiles, which means Scalp EG are out. And those are exactly the sort of thing that Ukraine desperately need. It's a real disappointment that the far right in Europe seem to be so up for defending Russia's objectives and promoting their propaganda. It's just incredibly frustrating. By the end of 2024, Denmark will stop training Ukrainian pilots on F-16 fighter jets, Danish Defense Minister Poulsen has said. The head of the Defense Ministry explained that the training of pilots will stop because Denmark is switching to F-35 fighters, which will use the Skridstrup Air Base, where Ukrainian pilots are currently trained. So I presume they'll be moved on to train somewhere else, but I don't know what the details of that are, if indeed any have been hammered out. But there is unfortunately a stop point to the Danish provision of F-16 fighter pilot training for the Ukrainians. Now, there's been quite a bit of, this particular video has done the rounds concerning the CB-90 combat boat 90 assault ships are being transferred to Ukraine. The Netherlands and Sweden already supplied Ukraine with a very significant amount. This is then talking about Akhmetov's Steel Front donated CB-90 assault ships to Ukraine's GUR. These high-speed maneuverable vessels, praised by American experts as monstrously powerful, took about 6 months to deliver. GUR servicemen mentioned the word Crimea during the handover, hitting at their potential use in operations related to the region. So there you go. I don't know. So Akhmetov Steel Front, I don't know who they are. You can just watch that video for a bit. Gives you an idea of what that is. It looks like it's Ukrainian. Interesting. So Rinat Akhmetov appears to be the guy that was that owned the Azovstal steel plant. So Rinat Akhmetov's Steel Front is an initiative that brings under one umbrella all military assistance provided by Rinat Akhmetov's businesses to Ukrainian defenders. From the first days of the all-out war in Ukraine, Rinat Akhmetov's businesses, Metinvest, DTEK, so that's the energy company that operates a bunch of the energy plants in Ukraine, FUIB, Telecom and others, and FC Shakhtar, so that's a football club, started helping the defenders of Ukraine. At the same time, Metinvest Group plants produce armor steel for bulletproof vests, steel shelters, protective shields for vehicles, etc. The mission of the initiative is to save the lives of the military and help our soldiers fight the enemy, bringing the victory to Ukraine closer. The amount allocated by Rinat Akhmetov to meet the military and humanitarian needs of Ukraine exceeds 9 billion hryvnias. So this appears to therefore be a boat that's been built or donated by Akhmetov. I mean, the CB-90 sounds like it's part of like the CV-90, like there's the Swedish BA Systems created infantry fighting vehicles and whatnot. So I don't know. I'll need to look into that. But in Sweden, you can see involved here, the Netherlands and Sweden already supplied Ukraine with a very significant amount of these. I don't know what very significant means, but they seem to be pretty decent vessels there. Yes, they're small enough to go down canals and rivers to get to Ukraine, to the Black Sea, but they could well be used on the rivers on, say, Dnipro and whatnot as well. Anyway, that is that. At the beginning of January 2024, exclusively reported, says German aid to Ukraine, that Germany is financing the delivery of 41 Mercedes-Benz Arocs to Ukraine. Today, the handover to the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine has been made public. Germany seems to be providing an awful lot of these logistics vehicles that have been so important for Ukraine. I mean, we often get sidetracked by thinking about tanks and IVs, but they can't fire their ammunition unless you get that ammunition and that fuel delivered. And so these sort of trucks are absolutely essential for Ukraine to be able to prosecute their defensive war. And Germany, as I've said, have been hugely important in getting a whole bunch of such vehicles to Ukraine. Now, I talked about this yesterday, how Serbia have apparently been providing an awful lot of artillery ammunition to Ukraine. I think more in terms of the ammunition being bought off their manufacturing concerns in Serbia, rather than this be a government policy to donate ammunition to Ukraine. But it's interesting that the rhetoric from President Vučić on the surface has been very pro-Russian, and we've seen this with Slovakia, with Fico being very pro-Russian, but saying actually our industry can keep churning out stuff for Ukraine, which is completely contradictory. It's saying, look, I have these strong moral opinions on what should happen in this war, but if you pay me some money, I'll just go against what I believe. So yeah, if you pay me, we'll give you stuff, but I think it's wrong. But here you go, you give me some money, so if one was to analyze this kind of philosophically, it would be complete double standards, and it wouldn't stand up to any kind of moral evaluation. But I think that the surface kind of moral rhetoric is wrong, and the stuff underneath providing equipment to Ukraine that they're getting money for is actually correct. So thankfully, money talks here. And Serbia are producing an awful lot of ordnance for Ukraine. Military factories in Serbia began working in 3 shifts in order to supply ammunition to Ukraine. Working really hard to get that to Ukraine. Now, I don't know of the details of this, but Stupidity in Essence, who's a member of the team, said the Danish Defence Ministry, so grain of salt and all that, have bought back an ammunition factory in Elling, north of Jutland, of which is now being inspected and restored. And at the same time, different ammunition companies are bidding on the production. It consists of 50 buildings and 18,000 square meters of land. It will take about a year before production can start. It's really interesting how there are countries that are putting things in place for a much longer term approach to artillery ammunition. This is the understanding that the war is going to go on long enough for that to be justified. So because I wonder sometimes, say Trump gets in and you've got the peace plan that's being touted by his advisors today, which would be completely appeasing Russia. It's terrible. But imagine that actually took place. What's the quickest that a forced negotiation could be brought about in Ukraine that actually an end to hostilities would take place on the battlefield? And then you've got these companies that then getting to and states that are getting together to create ammunition on like a 5-year plan down the line. Well, of course, if this all kind of ends in 6 months, then those decisions will probably be overturned. And yeah, of course, they've come far too late. That's kind of decision should be made 2 years ago, but hindsight is often 2020, isn't it? Ukraine has managed to overcome shell famine, says Reuters. So a commander of one of the airfield units told journalists earlier ammunition was strictly rationed, which gave the Russian infantry the opportunity to act more aggressively. Now the Ukrainian troops can fire at the enemy at full strength. At the same time, the airfield has other problems. In particular, servicemen note an acute shortage of military personnel. So now they don't have enough people to fire these howitzers, even though they have enough munition. Of course, that goes sort of slightly against what some people have said. It depends, because I think these things have changed. It's quite dynamic. Some people have said there are certain areas of the front line where there's no shell hunger, but other areas where there are. But that was a few weeks ago. Maybe things have changed since then. And then you hear this. So Peter Fiala, who is the Prime Minister in Czechia. So you've got Petr Pavel and Petr Fiala. Pavel is the president, Fiala the prime minister, both of them staunchly pro-Ukrainian. Fiala has been a guy that's been behind the Czech initiative for the artillery ammunition to get procured and supplied to Ukraine, but it's getting checked over because a lot of it is coming from places where it's either been stored poorly or the initial ordnance itself was not very good quality, so they're checking it over to make sure it's okay. And then there were claims that it should get to Ukraine starting before the end of June. That's what I reported yesterday. Now Petr Fiala is saying actually they've already had the first shipment of ammunition from our initiative. It arrived in Ukraine some time ago, which would then make sense of the idea that actually they don't have a shell hunger at the moment, because you've got a ramping up of production in Europe, you've got a ramping up production in the US, you've got the US aid packages coming through consistently now, and and then you've got the Czech initiative. So, and their own manufacturing, indigenous manufacturing as well. So all of that should mean that they have a fairly decent amount of artillery ammunition consistently coming through. French aid to Ukraine reports what Olaf Scholz here says in the context of working closely with France. I would be delighted to continue the good working relationship we have established with Sebastien, and that means Sebastien Lecornu, the French defense minister, over the past 2 years. It would be context. France and Germany have had something of a fractious relationship. They're the two big players in the EU, and they might both be jostling for that power position. Emmanuel Macron is much more overt in that than, say, Olaf Scholz, who's I don't think so much a leader as something of a follower. But there's been a bit of friction between the two because France has been big on rhetoric, but not as big on actually following up with stuff. Germany's been actually providing an absolute ton of stuff to Ukraine, but then there have been issues with not supplying troops or instructors as part of the coalition. They would have to change a law in order to do that, so it's a bit difficult. But then tourists not going. So there's all these things floating around. But actually, of late, they seem to be working much more closely together, and that relationship seems to have been more. It seems to be more united. Anyway. Here, Boris Pistorius, not Olaf Scholz, Boris Pistorius says, it would be a real pleasure to be able to build on this momentum. There is a lot to be done, and I think the Franco-German defence and security policy has never been more important. I'd agree. And I would like to be able to continue that with Sebastien. So, of course, the issue is that Sebastien Lecornu might not remain as defence minister if Rassemblement National come along and wipe the centrists off the map. Now, the problem is, out of 522 districts in France, it looks like the centrists of Macron's party are only likely to get 41. So you've got this fight between a coalition of the left and maybe a coalition of the right, maybe just Rassemblement National. And you've either got a situation where Rassemblement National sweep and make loads of gains, absolutely huge gains, in which case they're going to control parliament, or you get the situation where a left coalition will have maybe half, and Rassemblement National will have half, and the centrists in the middle will be squeezed out, and Les Républicains will be squeezed out as well, the centre right. They're looking like not doing so well. So you get the extremes, and actually that's probably not going to help Ukraine either, because although some of the left are supportive of Ukraine, there are elements of the left who are not that supportive of Ukraine. And so that as well might not be great. And what you really want, a bit like the European parliamentary elections, you want the centre to hold, because that's actually what's giving good, consistent, reliable support to Ukraine. And if the extremes of the left and right in France gain significant power, then that will harm aid to Ukraine. It will also mean that you will see people like Sebastien Lecornu not be the defense minister, and that will be a real shame, because I think he is doing a pretty decent job in that position. As Boris Pistorius says, it will be up to you, the men and women of the French Republic, to make the choice. But I admit that this decision will have consequences for the whole of Europe. We have said clearly, yes, we are in favour of supporting Ukraine, and we are on the side of good. So there's a bit of a warning there from Pistorius, and I think absolutely it's a warning that needs to be made. The French people are going to make a really big decision going forward, and I think they're going to be led by their desire to vote on a single issue, immigration, which will have really negative consequences outside of that issue. And the prioritizing that issue and therefore seeing the only solution as being either Rassemblement National as anti-immigration, or if you are pro-immigration, then going to the left, it will have dangerous ramifications. French politics is being turned on its head, and not in a good way, in my opinion. Right, Andrew Perpetua shows that a a remote mining vehicle. It appears to be a remote mining vehicle doing, goodness me, an awful lot of work here. State Emergency Service appears to, sappers, continue to clear agricultural land in the Kharkiv region. The video shows the operation of mechanized demining machine when it hits an anti-personnel mine. During this time, more than 503,000 pieces of explosive ordnance have been found and destroyed. An area of about 138 hectares has been cleared. What's interesting here is you see, I don't know whether this is all kind of former farmland or whether it's farmland that's fallow. They are giving it a good ploughing over. If it's not, then there's a shame to have to necessarily turn over all of this ecological land, all these ecological homes to different bits of wildlife, necessarily having to get churned over to turn into just brown mud because you've got to get rid of all the ordnance. And that is one of the outcomes of a war that's involving huge amounts of unexploded ordnance around. Okay, talking about remote vehicles, here we have unmanned guided vehicles, a load of ones that the Ukrainians have designed and made. In fact, we've been fundraising. I know we've just done the Medivacs. Greg Terry, Professor Gerdes, and myself. We raised, $260,000 for 4 Medivacs to go to Ukraine. They're in the process of going now, which is phenomenal. We'll get updates on that, I'm sure, in short order. But I was out in Ukraine and we got to see, it was the first time that Greg actually got to see some of these working, and we were there when they showed it to us, and they said, right, we need $5,000 for each of these, and Greg's like, yeah, we can help you out with that, so that for this one particular unit. So these have been on the battlefront, these have been used for some time, but here we have a whole load of them having different components added to them, different variants. So here, that's a mine layer. That's probably just to carry supplies. We've got guns on some of them. Just quite incredible where this is all going. Be interesting to see where warfare is in sort of 10 years' time. We see a really quick evolution of UGVs as well as UAVs and USVs. So on the ground, in the air, and on the sea. And we were talking yesterday about how a fleet of 20 sea babies can functionally perform as a warship, and that is a massively significant evolution of those. So Sam Bendit here gives a quick thread on what the role of combat UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles, at this point in the Ukraine war is. I recently authored an article on the Russian combat UGV developments for the European Security and Defence magazine. Main points below from the text, so a useful summary of that article. The article is meant as a snapshot in time to show what are the main UGV trends in the war. By May 2024, prior to its ill-fated invasion, Russian defense R&D worked on multiple UGV projects, but they were built in few numbers and tested in mostly in controlled environments. The few Russian combat UGV tests that took place in Syria were also limited to a few vehicle samples over a short time. There appeared to be no widespread drills incorporating this new tech in combined arms formations. The Ukrainian defenders are making the battlefield extremely difficult for the Russian forces, especially with the use of FPV drones. That become a real nightmare for larger and heavy vehicles like tanks. Anything that moves can be seen, tracked, or attacked. Therefore, the current trend is to use smaller, lighter, cheap, and attritable UGVs for logistics and supply runs, evacuation, and ISR combat, so intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or combat. Not unlike the trends in tactical drones, the FPVs becoming a weapon of choice over larger, more expensive UAVs. The Russian military's R&D efforts are not the only ones fielding such UGVs. There's also a massive volunteer startup effort that works directly with soldiers to build light UGVs directly at or near the front line. So you can go and see this in other tweet threads that he posts here. So the Russian volunteers are also helping out there, as they are indeed in Ukraine. This is where things are mostly stand at this point. And Ukraine's own army of robots is ahead of the Russian military in developing and fielding such combat UGVs. Give the article a read and let me know what you think, he says. So you can read that on his thread. So yeah, we are in the middle of seeing these develop, and we just seen how Ukraine are developing theirs, and the claim from Sam Bender is Ukraine are ahead of the Russians here. But of course, the Russians don't have a not inconsiderable R&D and military production sector, but of course they are under all the stresses and strains of a war economy and being able to get sanctioned components. So I don't know if that is playing a role in how Ukraine are, and I don't know how far they are ahead in UGV. So there are certain things that I see the Russians use that I think are ahead of the Ukrainians. It's quite dynamic, and it depends kind of which type of drone and what the function they are looking at using is as to who has the advantage. Right, moving on. Euromaidan Press here says the resistance movement in occupied Ukraine, called the Yellow Ribbon, reports that Russian occupation government plans to indoctrinate 48,000 children from occupied Ukraine will take place in Crimean camps this summer. That's incredible. 48,000 children, they claim, will be indoctrinated in Crimean summer camps. These camps reportedly promote militarism and Russification, aiming to erase Ukrainian identity. Kids wear military uniforms, learn warfare basics, and do drone operations. Russian occupying authorities use recreation as a cover for propaganda targeting Ukrainian youth. You've got to remember that this is a long-term thing for Russia. In the same way that 2014 to 2024, 10 years is a long time for Russia to be able to bring their own population into Crimea, into the Donbass, and start assimilating and then presenting Crimea and the Donbass as being very Russian, because of course all the pro-Ukrainian Ukrainians have moved out of there, or been forced out of there by this repatriation of Russian civilians from mainland Russia, if you like. Then along with that, those who remain after 2022's invasion will have their children filtered and brainwashed in line with the Russian narrative and objectives. And, you know, this is a long-term project for Russia. You're wondering where these areas will be in 2, 5, 10 years' time if Ukraine are unable to take back that territory. And that's the problem, is that if Ukraine does manage to take back the territory, what damage has been done? What are they going to find themselves in control of? Large areas of land that have effectively Russians in it, and all the Ukrainians that did live there now live in Ukraine. Are they going to move them back? How does it all work? But that's even assuming they're going to be able to retake that land in the first place. War Translated says, meanwhile, Russians happily continue fundraising for Starlinks. This means that the terminals are operational and are used for the military needs of the occupiers. The cost of the terminal and subscription for about 6 months cost them 136,000 rubles or £1,200. If Elon Musk really, really wanted to help Ukraine, this wouldn't be happening. If his will was there, and this is why I don't like Elon Musk. He is pro-Russian, and even if you're a big fan of Elon Musk, and I know some of you are, and it doesn't matter what I say and what the evidence is, you will remain a cult-like defender of Elon Musk. If he really wanted to help Ukraine, which I think should be the natural moral position of any human being on Earth, if he really wanted to help Ukraine, his actions would look very different to what they look. He doesn't really want to help Ukraine, which is why he says what he says and he does what he does, or doesn't do what he doesn't do. And in the case of Starlinks, he is allowing them, he's not working hard enough to stop Starlinks being used by the Russians on Ukrainian occupied territory. And it's that simple. Right, last thing I'm going to say pertains to this. I mean, it's a random bit of news here from China. So a 90-year-old woman from Zhangyang, Hubei in central China has used an iron hammer for over 20 years to crack nuts and hammer nails, only to discover it was actually a hand grenade. So she was using, looks like one of the old German hand grenades. Is obviously not, but it's those hand grenades on a wooden handle with a metal end, and she's been banging that into nails to try and fix things. And of course, she's just playing with death there. Anyway, my point of including that here is I do wonder at the end of this war how much ordnance will be all over Ukraine. We talked about demining large areas. We've heard about a woman dragged back a sea mine, didn't she? It washed up and she thought it was, I don't know, some kind of buoy or something. It's a mine. We've had people having ordnance outside their houses. They didn't realise quite what it was. There are and all the horror stories of people dying or losing limbs and whatnot, but also just the amount of small arms, like what happens to all the machine guns and ammunition. And this is why there is a lot of oversight from both the EU and the US, because while there might not be stuff going on to the black market now, this is a war zone, and what we've seen from other war zones is that it's difficult to keep a handle on all of these weapons that are flowing into Ukraine after the war ends. I'm not so much worried about it now, but certainly after the war ends, there'll have to be an awful lot of work to make sure that Ukraine remains safe, and that countries around Ukraine don't see a flow of arms and military equipment going out of Ukraine. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. Toodle pips. I'll speak to you soon.